Free Guy.
Yeah, with Ryan Reynolds. It's a what kind of a movie is it? It's maybe Pixar, but it's really silly. It's one of those movies it's entertaining at a lot of levels, but like it's theologically and philosophically brilliant too. It's about NPCs,
Oh,
freedom
really?
and NPCs.
Huh.
Yeah, it's really, really good.
Maybe I will watch it.
But it's related. A buddy sent me an article recently from some Substack. I'll put it in the comments when this is done or something. But it's something like why you are probably an NPC, and it breaks down like 7 subcategories of NPCs or something. It's like the 2 of them are like what I would call the exclusivists on the right side of history. So like this one over here and this one over here. The conservative or the liberal. Like I'm the NPC over here and I have my group think. No, I'm the NPC over here and I have my group think. Or there's the middler NPC, which is like the truth is in the middle. And there's one line from it that I really resonated with, where it's just like if you find yourself in groups of people or frequently around people where everybody thinks like you, you're probably an NPC.
Well, we all start out NPCs. I mean, so Vervaeke says that it is agape that creates people out of, these little biological beings that we birth. And the only way you create a person is you first create a non-player character. And as the baby grows, increasingly the baby becomes a player. Rather than, I mean, it all goes back to Grim Grizz's channel. There is no agency until there is. And this is, Karen has long been sort of chewing at the bone of knowing, loving to know. It's the same thing. I mean, agape grows us into greater levels of knowing. And that gets into Drew Johnson, what you just mentioned in terms of ritual. But the point of the video that I released this morning is that ritual, the agent is always related to the arena. And so ritual is also about growing in agency, because Peugeot talks about how ritual is sort of it's labor saving, it's energy saving. It also sort of releases us for more agency. So once the path to the river is trodden, now we can have a conversation while we're walking on the path instead of blazing it. And that's, technology is this double-edged sword, because technology on one hand affords this kind of leveling up of agency, but it also distorts and disrupts, and we're quite ignorant of that until we don't even really know what a car is yet, as Peterson so nicely put back in the day. So
well, sometimes that distortion is good, right?
Yeah. Well,
what do you think?
Go ahead.
What do you think? How is being an NPC related to subtle bodies and powers and principalities?
Well, they have us for, I mean, we become their physical bodies, and they have us for a long time. But so when Jesus, as the book of Colossians says, when Jesus basically takes control of and owns these principalities and powers, then Jesus sort of has us in a similar way. But this gets back to C.S. Lewis's quip about in Screwtape Letters about our Father below and the dreaded enemy, because the Father below only wants NPCs that he can continue to feed off of, whereas what God does is he wants to see us grow up as sons. And that with children, on one hand, you want you teach your children to obey, and you do all of that, but you do that, you sort of educate them into being your NPC, but then they begin to grow out of it, because what you realize is that you're also an NPC on certain levels, and they are in some ways also liberating you as they liberate themselves as they grow in agency. And the beautiful thing about having adult children now for me is that, while I certainly don't agree with everything that they think or stand for, At the same time, they have agencies that I don't have. And so then as a family, as a collective, we have certain powers that we wouldn't have without the children
As a body,
as a
yeah.
body.
Do you what do you think about this? I often think of this as Modus Trollins here. Oops, I just outed him. Sorry, dead named him. His secret account. Um,
That's right
so what
there on
I
it.
often think about this, yeah, well, it's not on this thing though. I often think of this as like, oh, that you need, yeah, I wish you wanted solid food, but you still need milk. How is that related to NPC versus free?
Well, I have an example about this. So when my wife and I were first going church shopping, looking for a place to that we would call our church, we would go there. I didn't, the churches we were going to were liturgical, in the way that kind of classically liturgical. And I don't know anything that's going on here. I'm like, why am I standing? Why am I sitting? What are these hymns? And so in that way, I guess I'm a NPC when I come in. And then, but what I really like about that NPC, that particular mode, is it starts to give me a formation that I could start to kind of take, participate in. And then the reason why I'm doing it is because for some reason I'm trusting these people. Like part of it is that they've been there for, a lot of these people literally, were baptized there as children, and now they're 80 years old and their children have been married there, and they'll actually have their funeral there. And so like there's a particular kind of trust that goes into it. I'm going to trust these people. They seem to be pretty good people. They have a really strong community. Uh, it's and so like that particular kind of NPC thing is really helpful. Uh, and I'm sure some of that can get wonky. Like I'm listening to this other book right now about cults and stuff, and well, that's you know, yeah. So that's my example.
Let
Sorry.
let me throw this in. So one of the things that I love, and I feel like I can talk about this and illustrate it and relate it better than I could a year ago. But so one of Polanyi's big ideas also is focal subsidiary integration, which is basically ritual knowing in a sense. So like the example that I've always used before is riding a bike or any sort of procedural. You use the baking illustration or like following a recipe or something. There's a degree to which learning a bike is you have to focus on these patterns and these things in a particular way and repeat them over and over and over. Learning to play guitar, dribble a basketball, and you have to focus on it. You have to do the fundamentals over and over and over and over and over until the focal things become citissarially integrated. And this is how you build neural pathways actually in your head. You focus on things in your prefrontal cortex to the degree that you integrate them into your subconscious, and then you can do them without thinking so that you can actually drive a car,
Right.
so that you can actually ride a bike. But my point, this is the problem with modernist assumptions of language and to talk about things intellectually, especially in an identitarian way, is you think about all the stuff that you're talking about with your prefrontal cortex is stuff that you fully integrated into yourself, which is the difference between mammonistic and Eucharistic knowing.
That's right. And so that's in a sense, when we're driving a car, we're NPCing on purpose.
Yeah, to a degree.
To a degree, which is exactly what you just described. And we NPC on purpose while we're driving a car so that we can, in a sense, it's a multitask cheat. We sort of create these other little, we sort of create these other little bots within us. So I'm going to now have a bot to drive the car so I can talk to my friend Luke as we drive up to Thunder Bay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's really a tremendous power. And so, I mean, an NPC is sort of a troll. It's sort of a put downward for people because we know we need to be more than that. And as Chad said, with respect to worship, you go into a church and you watch the liturgy, and no matter if it's a high church or a low church, all churches have liturgy because all churches have practices that are repeated. Low churches tend to be a little bit more simple, a little bit more modern in terms of they're sort of at the surface. A very old church like the Orthodox, I mean, it's just
Or they don't have explicit ritual.
right. But but all the ritual is implicit. But when you go to church and you start, again, it's like a child. You take on that first draft because you have to try and do it one way. And if you actually learn from someone who has done it, you already have a leg up. And so then, and that's why culture can be cumulative. And that's why we even have this conceptualization, which is extremely popular right now, of progress, because hopefully you will learn from your parents, your children will learn from you, your grandchildren, if your children are wise enough to continue the legacy, your grandchildren will go on. And so it will keep going. And so ritual, and that's why, and Peugeot, with his illustration, with the wolves, going back to Peterson, I mean, that's a great illustration. And we actually see in that sense progress, potentially progress through history. But part of what we're dealing now is all of the technological disruption. I almost was going to make I'll probably, after I finish chatting with you guys, make a video for tomorrow on Louise Perry's conversation on Unheard from about a year ago with Ayla. That's this woman that's been OnlyFans, and she's been a prostitute and all of these things. And she ostensibly does all this research now on things. And she's been on Benjamin Boyce channel. She's been on a lot of corner adjacent channels. But, so they're having this argument about, or this conversation about, well, what's best for society? What are our norms? And really, we should be talking about what are our ideals, because ideals are far more flexible necessarily than laws. Laws tend to be binary. And I think this gets into your intuitions, Luke, about creeds as iconic rather than, because when I listen to you talk and sort of chafe on the confessionalism thing, I really hear the difference between ideals and rules. Now, rules have a certain power that ideals don't have, especially for the young, because the young tend to need more rules. But as we grow in agency, ideals become more important because we recognize, as Vervaeke nicely talked about in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, rules have the strength and weakness of rules are the same thing. It's that they're binary, they're open and closed. And
a lot of sorry.
Go ahead, Chad.
A lot of my ideals that I've discovered that I should be living by were actually from breaking rules and having and noticing, like, well, that was pretty much a bad idea to break that rule. I should probably adopt some ideals, and so that's been my experience. And so it's a participation thing again, and also through gaining a different perspective and all those different things. And then, like, one more quick thing, that the modern problem that you're talking about, as it relates to like this bicycle thing that he was talking about, makes me think of when, have you ever seen that video where they take the bicycle and they switch the turning on it? And so when you turn the handlebars left, the bike goes right. And when you turn so the weird thing is it'll take you about 6 months to learn how to ride that bike. And then after you learn how to ride that bike, you can no longer ride the other bike.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's the modern problem. Like, this is, so we've got everything kind of flipped around, and so we have to relearn how to do things.
So I bought this new electric car, and I'm doing one pedal driving, and I'm learning now to, I'm becoming a better driver. I start braking before I used to, because you sort of let up off the gas, and then the car begins to slow, and then you don't have to use brake pads, because I don't want to pay for further brake pads, because brake pads are actually kind of a waste. You pay to go and then you pay to stop. But then I went into my wife's gasoline car, and intuitively I'm driving that as if it has one pedal braking, and I let up off the gas and the car keeps going because it's a weakened analogy to exactly what you say, Chad, and that I have all these years driving one certain way, and now in an electric car, I'm learning to drive another way. But then when I switch back to a gasoline car, the brain has to sort of, so that I can, continue to NPC my driving.
Dude. This is a really scary thing that happened to me the other day. I'm sorry, I'll stop talking at this, but the other day I was at work in the morning with a bunch of the guys. We're looking at some a magazine with these pictures of this tile job, and I'm standing there. I want to get a closer look at the picture, and I go on the magazine and I put my fingers on to zoom in, and I was like, "What the fuck, dude?" And like I think it is funny, but it's like, what are we doing here? Okay.
Well, technology. Sorry, Luke. I mean, technology changes your habits and your patterns. You get used to using Google Maps or some sort of map thing, and then, like I was saying the other day with my daughter, I drew a little map for her to get to some local place in the neighborhood so she could go dog sit, and it was like Chinese to her. She had no idea what she was looking at. Or people have no idea how to orient to the stars. Like you think somebody could sail across the ocean navigating by the stars anymore? Well, the medium is the message, which is why McLuhan's on my Mount Rushmore of the meaning crisis, which I don't think, I don't think people
You
really.
only got 4 slots on Rushmore.
I know. I have some backups. I'm pretty sure McLuhan's up there. I don't know who. Polanyi, Sheldrake. Man, I mean, there's like interchangeables. There's backups that do all the same things. But yeah, so a lot of this is just law and spirit. I mean, isn't this St. Paul?
Yeah, law. It is. Law and spirit does have that same, a similar dynamic. Because spirit, I mean, often when we talk about the spirit of the law, we are talking about an ideal. Because there's an ideal is sort of a telos, it's a fixed destination, and you can get there in different ways. Law is like a road. Here are the boundaries. You stay on the road. The law, that this road will get you to the destination. A spirit is more, you're going to have to go over here, go over there, go over there. And the truth is, we are spirits. And so just like Chad said, he did a lot of learning by breaking laws. And I was watching, my wife and I are watching this latest Taylor Sheridan piece, Lioness, on, and it's really quite good. And so a little bit of spoiler, one of the themes in the show is the marriage tension between the main character, Zoe Saldana, and then her husband. And they're both high status people. And they're sort of ignoring their oldest teenage daughter who's playing around with sex. And her father said to her, there's 2 things that will completely disrail your life trajectory. One is cars and the other is sex. And so like the parents laid down these firm rules to her, and she broke them because she was in a car accident. And then in the hospital, they discovered that at 14, she's pregnant. So, and now it was grim distress. And so it was very good in that the parents kind of had then to take on the wisdom to say, this is something we can't be angry about right now, because she sort of level jumped. And okay, now you've been pregnant. Now you've been in a car accident. Spirit is a much more costly path than law. We have a number of new entries into here.
So
sorry to step on your live stream, Grizz.
No, I wasn't ready today anyway. But you guys need savings throws, and you called for more ritual when you shared this to your audience. So shouldn't that happen immediately?
You go. Yours is one of. I was going to make a comment that yours is one of the most ritualized channels we have in this flotilla.
Pray for us now. Pray for us in the hour of our need, Grim.
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of mind control going on, especially with your horrible misuse of the NPC terminology. So I'd like to give everybody a chance to have a savings throw against the mind control by choosing either survival, social, wisdom, or heart as your participatory buy-in. And if it's over 10, you take half damage, under 10, full damage from the mind control. But at least some of us here want what's best for you. Survival, social, wisdom, or heart. Choose. Oh, Indigo out the box. Survivalists, Prime 17. Socialists, number 9. Lovers of wisdom, you made it. That's a 10. Heart folks, you got only your 4 chambers. You're going to need some bonuses. I'll give you a +5 to your saves if you chat in Pastor Paul's or Grail Country's Hive Mind chat during this stream.
Are we streaming on Grail Country too? Is this 3 channels at once streaming?
Well, I usually do it on my channel in Grail Country because I do it on Grail Country because that's the only way that I can really participate there outside of commenting, because I can't ever coordinate times to talk with anyone.
You do it because nobody watches your channel.
Well, and that. And because I don't know. If my channel got big, see, this is where this comes in the NPC thing. If I get a lot of followers, I'd be like, you're all sycophants and you don't know me and I don't want anything to do with this anymore, and I'd burn it down. We're all in this pyrotheology. We got to build a church so we can burn it.
Don't worry, Luke, they won't. I will, but they won't.
So we are on Grizz, we are on mine, we are on Grail Country. We're not on Grizz's channel?
No, sir, I'm not I don't take away from you. When you're streaming, unless I didn't realize you were going to, I don't run my channel against yours.
No, but you can hit that little button up there, right? That's all I did. Luke started, then I hit that little button, and then you can stream it to your channel too. So
I'd rather they join us here is the thing.
Okay.
Or at Grail Country.
Okay. All right. Yosef, how are you?
I'm okay. I did not finish your latest one on Ritual. I'm not a member, so I only saw it this morning. But I don't know. I definitely had some thoughts. I have to say that I caught up on some of your stuff. I didn't have the energy, honestly, to follow past couple weeks with the holidays and everything. But yeah, I did do a little bit of catch up, and I have to say, so I don't know. I found a couple kind of odd things. One was, I know you did kind of at the beginning of that Ritual chat tie it into the Israel-Gaza thing, but I don't really know that it works so well, because neither of those are really fully westernized, certainly not Christian countries. And how it plays out is very different, even though, yes, there's a layer, especially I think in the first 40 years of Zionism, of kind of Western European, like really strong Western European influence. It was never through Christianity, right? It was already kind of funky coming in there. So I don't know. I mean, and they've been fighting forever, right? I mean, we've been fighting literally for 75 years since 1948, and even before that, actually, it was just the 100th anniversary of the Haifa massacres. So like, to say that this is a sign of like the fall of modernity or something declining, receding, this has been going on since before World War II. That I don't really know that I buy that narrative exactly. I think the way it's being received in the West certainly kind of is showing kind of faults in the liberal kind of post-liberal order type issues. But I don't necessarily think that the conflict itself comes from that. At least not fully. It's really complicated because how much of it is religion. Yes.
Can I get your comment on a current event while I have access to you?
Yeah.
I understand that there is a red heifer that has been born, and there's some significance. Would you please comment for me?
Well, you should watch this amazing TV show from about 10 years ago now called Dig. Dig was a one.
Well,
no, seriously.
You just said that because I was being one, right?
Well, no, it's actually a one-season show about these evangelicals in Texas who find a red heifer, bring it to Israel. It's tied into this like crazy kind of Dan Brown style archaeology, mystery, conspiracy thing where they are like, these guys are trying to, I don't know, collect like the 12 stones from the priest's breastplate. And like, it's a crazy, you would really enjoy this show. You should be able to still find it online. It's one season, but it's all about what happens if they find the red heifer in kind of this Dan Brown-esque version. look, every couple of years we hear reports that there's a red heifer, and almost always it's. I mean, not almost always. We've yet to actually have one in the modern era.
For you, it's like prophecy at end times. They're always saying it's going off, and then it turns out to not.
Exactly.
So you pay no mind to such things.
If I hear about it, there's a little like tag in my brain, and almost always I just can throw that away after like a couple months because.
Thank you for letting me derail you, and I'll go check out that dick.
Yeah.
Is it I Love Dick? Is that the name of the TV
I think
show?
it was just called Dig. It was like one of these early
Dig.
D-I-G. Yeah.
Oh wow, I misheard you, and that made everything
So did I.
more
I was
awkward.
like, where is he taking me here?
No. Archaeology, digs. I thought you understood because you said that was a dig. Whatever. Okay.
I'm really restraining myself right now. By the way.
Yeah. Good job.
Are you edging?
Go type in Google. I love.
I'm holding back the Consciousness Congress.
Oh, okay.
Can we go back to the ritual thing though?
Sure.
Okay. After you all look up this thing quickly. Okay.
There is a show, I Love Dick, which is different. And it's not porn, but there is Dig, and there's a variety of shows named Dig, but I found the correct one. So good.
See, I get the thing back on the rails by running the train branding.
Woo!
I'm here.
Also, before you go, Joseph, it's nice to meet you. Oh, he kicked me. There you were.
He took himself out.
PVK, I don't think I've ever met you before. I'm Jason, by the way. I've been floating around the Discord for a long time now, but I've met all these other
You've
guys.
kind of met him throughout me. He's part of me. He's colonized my mind to some degree.
I'm trying. Anyway.
If you ever need to talk about Ecclesiastes with someone, Jason's your guy.
I don't know if that's true.
Jason's like a brilliant, intuitive, Protestant, evangelical, charismatic wizard shaman.
This is the whole reason I streamed, just so you guys could talk great about me. Keep going, please.
You should. Hey, actually, I want to pitch that. I want PBK to talk to Jason on forgiveness. Let's do it.
Actually, I joined because Cal told me to get on, and then he bailed. So
yeah.
But I would like PBK to talk to Cal. I think that would be interesting.
Well, those are two. Yeah, those would be two good ones. Sorry, Jason. What do you want to say?
I was just saying hi because I just kind of hopped on here. Then, I've met everybody else and talked to Chad, Joseph, and you, but I've never actually met.
What channel
Paul
do you usually
Vanderclay.
talk on, Jason?
Well, I had my own channel for a little bit, but it died this last year because you've probably seen my comments. It was just called Almond Tree.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Yeah. So
here's
I've been kind of around, but yeah, I haven't done anything in a while. I've been on Jacob's channel, just trying to do Bible studies with him, but I've just missed so many of them because I've been working 2 jobs. So
he goes deep into the Bible. He basically just reads George MacDonald in the Bible over and over and over and over and over.
It's because I still can't get it.
Which are good choices. But so to relate to this with ritual and forgiveness, Joseph, did you have something else you wanted to say?
I would go back to the ritual conversation. I didn't see exactly where you guys were, but I mean, I don't know. The last thing that Paul said before we all interrupted and jumped on about so the whole thing between the relationship between law and ritual and spirit of the law, and there's also like this whole like the affordances of all these things together, right? Because I was thinking about this a little bit when I was listening to your thing earlier today, Paul, because a lot of what I find Jewish ritual to do is essentially it brings, and this is kind of to Johnson's point, it brings together the law and the participation in a way that they actually afford each other and are fully in contact with each other. And what I kind of find lacking sometimes, like, I think, in the spirit of the law conversations, and is, look, I'm coming at spirit of law from a whole different place. We can acknowledge that. But to me, spirit of the law is can be, and I think I see this because it's more abstract. And it's like trying to like find some like deeper, essential, whatever form. It kind of does what statistics does, right? It becomes like everything gets reduced to like the mean, or like the single like attempt at finding a pattern but then you ignore like all of the things that make it fitted to its actual embedded situation. That because not just, you said the law is like a path, but like part of a path is like being able to walk on the path. And if you just give someone a map, it's not the path. I mean, this is the whole point, right? Those conversations. But there's also something that's, this is not just a propositional problem. I think this is just as much a procedural thing. Because when ritual becomes like, oh, the point of the ritual is the ritual itself, or the point of the ritual, you sometimes see this actually with symbolic thinking a lot. I see this in Kabbalah. I see this sometimes in some of the Eastern Orthodox stuff I've been exposed to at this point, where like even the procedural can kind of become this kind of very reduced, abstracted form. And this is right where this is the whole like that meme where you get like the thing that represents the thing is no longer the thing, and it keeps getting more abstract until it becomes
Beauregard strawberries.
Exactly.
Which I learned from Wokel, which almond tree kind of looks like. And I'm getting, because of the way the discussion is going, I'm getting this clip from, I think it was an episode with him and Lindsay and Boyce.
Yes.
But Boyce goes into the recycle tree, and I think that we're hitting the 2 points of that and not the third, of like from ideation or from material to ideation to law, and then back into material where and it's a spiral that way.
Potentially, I saw that, but it's been a while.
Because we're going like from ideation into law, right?
Right.
And then what we're losing on the way.
I'm not sure.
So then we have to hit back to what actually is once we get lost in the way of just the law. And
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm going that way, because to me the law isn't the abstract bit. To me, right? Like, so I mean, this could be a Christian Jewish difference type thing too, because the law. Well, one, we don't, right? Like, this is confusing because are you talking about law, or are you talking about Torah, which is translated as law but does not actually mean law, right? And that's part of.
Well,
right,
at the social destruction layer, we're generally talking about, I'd say we're talking about the legislative, secular, like aside from religion laws more than what, but like I would say that the hope of your law is that it runs true through all three cycles, and you treat it as if it does.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's better, but thanks. Anyway.
Well, it has to be true. I mean, the law, the idea, the whatever, it has to be true on every level, or else it becomes divorce. It's no longer symbolic. It's no longer religion. It's no longer actually uniting these things. Like Peter Rollins in a recent episode spoke of money, and he said this is where, like, if you get to the place where you pursue a lot of money, but it's almost to the point where, like, say like a millionaire dies in an empty apartment on a mattress because he's so scared to abstract the money, because it just becomes about the act. It becomes about the accumulation of wealth. And so he said technically that becomes a religion, because you're actually concerned with an abstract, divorce, separate thing. You don't actually care about the money, which is just meant to buy you things. You're actually not even a materialist. You're actually a religious, abstracted person, but either way you've divorced those things. And the whole thing is like those two things always have to be united, which has always been my critique of confessionalism and why a creed isn't, because it's really like, if you go on the OCA website, it says the symbol of the faith. It's these ideas cannot be abstracted from their embodied reality, or else the law becomes the not law, which is why St. Paul says in 1 Timothy, one of my favorite verses, the law is just if you use it lawfully. Adverbs.
Yes, exactly.
Your turn, Paul. Your turn.
Well, I've just, it's, part of the blessing of the corner has been that you know, when I talk to Yosef or Jacob, and the sense I get of how they handle the law and what that means to them is I get a very different sense than I think Christians have been deeply influenced, obviously, by Paul of Tarsus in terms of what he does with the law in Romans and in the New Testament. And even Christians who this is where it gets into ritual and multiple generations. Christians who can't necessarily articulate or even sort of develop a theory of law based on Paul still have this stance towards it inherited, especially in Protestantism, through Luther, who really, you know, shakes things up. And then Calvin sort of pulls it back a bit with the third use of the law. But then when I listen to you know, the Jews sort of work through this, it's like, wow, this is I'm not always sure we're talking about the same thing, even if we're using the same word.
Yes. Have you read? I know I've asked you this, but it's been a while. Maybe you've read it since, and maybe you haven't. Maybe I should send it to you. Christina Hayes, "What's Divine About Divine Law?"
No, I haven't read it.
Okay. An X1. Honestly, it's better than her biblical series. Even I think it's her best work. She goes through the the Tanakh conception of law, or at least First Temple period, let's say, and earlier conception of law. Somewhat ancient Near East, but mostly just Jewish, or whatever you're going to call it, Israelite, whatever. She then goes through and there's a couple schools within that she kind of tries to pick apart, but for the most part, it's pretty convergent. She goes through a dozen different Greek schools of thought on how law works: natural law, divine law, etc., positivist law. And then she does rabbinic law, and then she does Pauline conceptions, and she separates these 4 layers and and Paul really, and I think she makes a very good argument for this, that Paul's conception of law is very rooted in essentially a mixture of 2 or 3 of the Greek schools, and much less Jewish. And this ties into the Paul within Judaism version that Boyarin argues, that he's a Hellenistic Jew, he's not a Pharisaic Jew. And that his understanding of law and how he uses it, at least to talk to his audiences, is totally Greek. And what the implications of that are for the kind of the divergence between the two. So yeah, no, really worthwhile.
I might have a really dumb question. How are we using law right now? Because to me, my mind would think, I would think of just almost go back to Genesis 1. You eat this fruit, you'll die. I wouldn't know how else to conceive of law. Because isn't that the first law?
Well, is it? Did they die?
Well, that's the whole thing. Because I would think the law could be any law you make. I mean, it's not obviously not arbitrary.
You guys ran back to Genesis, and you're doing fancy things there, but you're gonna have to spell it out for us, the rest of us, if you want us to keep up.
Well, Jason has follow him. He usually goes good places.
Well, the reason I was wondering, because you could, because every country has different laws, every religious group has different laws, every identity has different laws. But if you're just going back, so you could kind of make up any law you want to. I'm not saying it's arbitrary, but God could any Genesis 1. But he said, you eat this fruit, you'll die, which seems if I want to, if I'm just anybody reading the Bible, it'd be it seems like people don't complain about that enough. It's why would God say this? That seems like such a strange thing to say, don't eat of this fruit. It's a knowledge of good and evil, so I get all the symbolic stuff incorporated in it. But that is law, right? That's making law, is knowing good and evil. So you're going to establish laws that this is evil, and God is the judge, and He gives that, and so that just seems like the first law. So then, I don't know how to use that term law. Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
We have 3 people wanting to respond, or 4.
Chad, we haven't heard from in quite some time.
Yeah.
Let's let him go.
Well, I was thinking about this. I think it's along the same lines, Jason. It's what happens when an NPC gets a hold of a law is he's really practicing a prejudice rather than a principle. And what I mean by that is, so my understanding of prejudice is having an opinion about something, one that's not rooted in actual fact or experience. And like that's kind of goes to Luke's confessional issue there. I mean, we just like we that so like the NPC that they're like uh, ends up operating like let's say Eve. Eve was kind of an NPC, right? And then she's like, well, is that true? And then she acts and makes this sacrifice or this terrible move, and now she has experience with it. So now she has an experience. Now we are like taking this story and using it to form all sorts of different laws. I don't know if that's making damn sense, but it's making sense to me.
You've
But I just
made a disturbing amount of heresy, like enough to make me uncomfortable with the way you're speaking of the mother of all creation, or at least mother of us, theoretically.
well,
But
the
the
point is
whole
the
tree
prejudice
thing,
thing, because
I gotta swing back by the tree thing that Jason brought up. Like, surely die.
Well, here's
Our,
where the Hebrew gets
it
complicated.
feels like we're not dead yet, but that doesn't.
everybody dies.
But God doesn't seem to be here, and so it's like we're separated from Him. Maybe we are in death right now, still dying, still surely dying from the apple.
Amen.
I don't
I'd
know. This
agree
is
with
all
that.
heavy. I'm out. Love you guys. Oh wait, card
You,
for
Grim.
the show. Oh,
Uh,
go figure.
So one of the things I want to throw in, Joseph, and see how you think about this. I was thinking about this recently too, is that we have a very, I mean, particularly in my experience in the West, and this is a big difference between Roman Catholic, Latin Christianity, and Eastern Christianity, is law is characterized as very judicial, legal. I mean, that's part of the whole Cartesian split. It's like this abstract idea thing that's separate from all of the symbolic instantiation of what that reality is. And so, like, when you break a law, I would say in an orthodox mindset, like eat of this tree and you will surely die. That law it's not an abstract morality thing in and of itself. It's saying if you do this thing, this is the consequence of what will flow out of that into your life. But I think the interesting thing about Christianity, Jason, is that there's almost a way within Christianity that I would say is you have to voluntarily enter into the consequence of Adam and Eve, a la Christ, in order to have the fullness of knowledge and the fulfillment of creation. That's the whole trampling down death by death. And so death, the curse, becomes the gateway to life. And that's how Christ has reconciled all things to himself in his death, in your death.
So I think I do make two. So one, there's some similarities there. There's a general, I'd say, biblical principle. The rabbis kind of make it explicit that the cure is always in the disease. So that is kind of what you just said at the end there, which is also part of what influences kind of how I approach technology in the Holy I discussion.
Yeah, same.
I think another part of this though is I would take some of that kind of natural law view of the initial command of don't eat from this tree or you'll die. And here's the problem: is there's a bit of a Hebrew grammatical construct issue here, because all the other laws where it says if you do this you'll die, or it's an active grammar, and here it's passive. So I actually don't think that this is a great paradigm of all law, because here it does seem to be more natural, whereas the other ones actually seem to be more positivist, so like something that actively has to be brought about by God or somebody or whatever. I think so, and I think this is an important differentiation because there's a very good argument. So what Christine Hayes will get into is the big debate over natural law versus other versions of the law, and the Greeks, for the most part, are very influenced by natural law, much more so than Judaism is. There really isn't so much evidence of natural law kind of in the First Temple or earlier periods and how to read these texts. But what you see in the rabbinic period is they actually start making, Paul and the rabbis both kind of grapple along different lines in this area. Obviously Paul in Romans and other places. The rabbis, kind of the best way to see this is in the Noahide law discussion in the Babylonian Talmud, where they essentially say that natural law is essentially Noahide law and Adamic law or whatever, but it's not Sinaitic, Mosaic, whatever law. That's positivist law. Is kind of where they draw the difference. But they're not. The Babylonian Talmud is kind of is obviously very authoritative for us. Maimonides, though, does not read it that way. He actually reads it as none of this is natural law, and he pushes back even harder against the natural law framing. So in the sense of if you do this, you'll die. Like if you touch a hot pan, you'll get burned, right? Like that's all we're talking about here. If you eat this fruit, then, you know, it's like poisonous or it will bring death into your life. But one of the ways that's like very easy to see this is Adam is not commanded about not taking of the tree of life. It has no effect, it seems, or no temptation or no meaning for him earlier. And it's only after this moment where the tree of life actually seems to have value to man that he has to be removed from the garden such that he won't take from it. And there's an interesting point here because to what Luke was saying, if you take our reading of the tree of life, especially how it's then used later in Psalms, the Torah and the tree of life are seen as equivalents. And there's kind of the one could read this as like without man being cast out of the garden, the Torah never has to actually be given to man. Like it's still the blueprint of creation. It still is this whole logos thing. That is the wisdom and the thing that structures reality or whatever, but it's not, doesn't have to ever be given to man, and man never has to take it without once, like before eating, or not eating, that's the wrong thing, before the whole thing with the fruit. To what Chad was saying, I definitely would push back. I think, Grimm called it straight out heresy. I don't know if I'd do that, but to me, there's so many layers to the sin. It's not really just the eating. I think the big issue, I think I talked about this last time, right? Is that she Eve, there's three different expressions that she sees the fruit as good. Right. It looks good to eat. Right. She says one of the words is very propositional. It's like her, she cognized that it was good. And then there's another one where she sees it's good, it's perceptual. And the third one is she imagines the taste of it, I think. And so she has these like three kind of different layers of things that all kind of, she seems to already have knowledge or be mixing the knowledge of good and evil, whatever it is. She's already seems to be there. She already seems to have some sort of, so this is what people say, oh, this is where they get free will, or this is where they like add emotional reasoning on top of moral reasoning, whatever it is. Those arguments kind of fall flat to me because I see this whole thing happening where she's already doing things before she even eats of the fruit. And it's almost more in the entire embodied act of using all of her senses and kind of what she thinks the spirit of the law is, what she thinks, like, right, all that gets processed here and it fails, right? She thinks the spirit of the law has something clearly, right? She thinks you can't touch it, and like why she thinks that's a whole discussion, but that's not part of the command initially. So maybe that's really Adam's understanding the spirit of the law or how to protect the law better procedurally. And then I think that, right, that's one part of the sin. There's this whole, then there's the actual eating, the disobeying part. But then there's this whole, the aftermath, which actually has a whole bunch of other layers, right? The hiding, the attempting to kind of lie to God, the not taking responsibility, right? There's like all of these layers. I was reading something, like we reread Genesis this past Sabbath as the yearly cycle. And so it's like very fresh in my mind. So I happened to be reading a bunch of stuff on this, and a very, very short piece. This book I happened to pick up last year, and I haven't finished yet, but I'm just going by the cycle of the readings. So he said something that I never like dawned on me exactly, not at least directly, which was it's right after Adam is given the command or warning or whatever you want to call this law of not eating. It's literally the verse after that God says man needs what do you want to call it? An oppositional processing partner. And sorry, it is not good for man to be alone. He needs an opponent processing partner, to use our phrases from here. And like, was the purpose of Eve initially to help him keep that command? Was she kind of the make or break kind of lever here, right? Where she could kind of push history into the two directions. And it kind of gives her much more of a role, and it focuses on her, I think, in an interesting way. There's also this like crazy midrash I've heard where Adam chose to eat the fruit so that Eve would not be alone.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Which is like, yeah.
Jason, does that mean that I wish myself a curse for the sake of my brethren?
Yeah, it sounds similar. Yeah. Yep.
In my adult Sunday school class, which we're going to be doing estuary in January in that time slot, and I'm thinking about ways that I can keep that class going. I probably can't do it in real space, but I could probably do it online, which would be very interesting. I'm trying to think about how exactly I want to do that. But in my adult Sunday school class, I've been working sort of, and it sounds analogous. So I put the sample for Christine Hayes's book in Kindle. It's nice because you can just kind of click the sample and I can start reading it. And if I really get into it, then I can buy it. But the immediate and mediated law is sort of number one and number two. And you see this contrast in a sense with Romans 1 with Paul, where the Greeks, it just says the Greeks don't have the Torah. And so they are working from is, they're working from their ignorance. They're just watching cause and effect. They know some things of God, but it's all cause and effect, and they're a mess. And then he wrestles with the story of Israel, and they were given the law, but they're rebellious. And so they wrestle with their heart. And so then, of course, Romans 3, everyone's a mess, whether. And so, but the law number one and law number two, I sort of contrast that with my God number one and God number two. I don't do that in my Sunday school class because they don't hear the God number one, God number two stuff. But the God number one is sort of the immediate. It's consequence. In my Sunday school class, I use the hot stove. The child will learn not to touch the stove when the child burns their hand. The mediated law has the mother that comes and says, "Don't touch the stove." And someone's got some. Is that it? Okay. So I'm really interested in what Christine Hayes has to say, because of course, what happens with words, generally speaking, as they go through time, is they become so much more differentiated. And like when you say law, that word law carries so much freight with us now. And part of the difference is, of course, that for the Mosaic Code, this was in many ways analogous for us to the civil law that we have, let's say, in the United States of America. And a great example of this is adultery. If you commit adultery with your neighbor's wife in the United States of America, you're not going to go to court or be put in jail for committing adultery. The Mosaic Code, of course, was a legal code. And so this word law is so differentiated. And we have this separation in the United States of church and state. So there you have canon law. Of course, Father Eric is spending his time becoming a canon lawyer for the Roman Catholic Church. But how we live with that reality in the United States is like, well, the Roman Catholic Church can decide whatever the heck they want about whatever the heck they want. That's an entirely different sphere, in a sense, an entirely different arena than this legal code that we share in the United States. And of course, what you find in, let's say, I've been fascinated, and hopefully Chezi can jump in here. I've been just absolutely fascinated by Israel today, in that, oh gosh, when he's talking about bacon, what does the modern state of Israel do with bacon? And now I think for a lot of Americans, this just blows our mind. The video I was going to do right now was this little bit of work on Louise Perry talking to this sex worker who's about, well, what should our cultural norms be with respect to sex? Well, obviously, you can read in the book of Leviticus, there are laws regarding sex. America has laws regarding sex. The Catholic Church has laws. The Orthodox Church has laws. The Christian Reformed Church has laws. Most people sort of live. The only law they're living under tends to be the law of the nation state within which they reside. And then whatever moral code. But again, you see this idea of law as just multiplying, and okay, which law are we talking about?
Right. But I think so. When I first was listening to Peugeot, and I discovered him after probably everyone else, like of the main speakers in TLC, because he had the least appeal to me. And if you've ever seen stuff on my channel, like, which is also not very active, almost everything I do is essentially a response to him because he just gets under my skin. And part of it is, yeah, no kidding. And part of it is,
wow, I want to see you talk to Peugeot now.
I would love to talk. I mean, I don't think that'll ever happen, but he does. I mean, and part of it is because we operate in different symbolic worlds. As you know, he's going to claim his is fully biblical, but I'm telling you, we operate very different. There's Kazi, who's a much bigger fan of the Peugeot brothers than I am. But the other thing is, like, for us, and gets to what Luke was saying, like, the spirit of the law and the law can't really be divorced, because otherwise the law becomes anti-law. Like, but to put that into like real concrete terms, like for us, this is all, like, our symbolic world is not a symbolic world. It's like it's a fully immersive thing, and it has the law layer and the symbolic layer and everything. But it's all of it, everything, everywhere, all at once, right? It's that, and there's nothing beyond it. There's no way to carve off a separate sphere. There's no. Now we can talk about Judaism's had to grapple with the modern world, and in some ways, modern Orthodoxy especially, but also all the movements and Judaism has done this to different degrees. But part of it is, right, I was talking to this guy on Jacob's server, and he's an Eastern Orthodox convert, and we were talking about carrying on the Sabbath, and he said something along the lines of, oh, well, it's not practical, like, for me to, like, live in walking distance of a church. Like, I converted, and I would have to, and like, I don't live near a church. I drive to the church. It's however many miles away. And I said, that's like the difference for us. Like, when you sign up, when you convert, I mean, we don't look for converts, but when you do convert, like, and this is controversial because of the economic kind of implications, but like, we generally, in the US at least, because of the distances, we require converts to live in Jewish communities where they could walk to a synagogue if they're going to convert Orthodox. Because like,
it's part of the religion is more important than the economics.
It's amazing.
What?
Well, the economics are part of it. They're all part of each other. They're fully intertwined. That if and this has led to issues. This has led to issues with people complaining that it's really hard to not be of a certain socioeconomic class and be Jewish in the U.S. because if you're too, like, can you be too poor to actively be able to participate? Like, that's a really big issue. And like, and then of course, okay, so we have charities and philanthropy and all those things to try to, but like, is there kind of a baseline problem with kind of, because like how the materialism does play in, even when it is knocked down multiple pegs, it still has to be fully embedded and entwined with everything else. So, and then he was pointing out, well, yeah, but like, I mean, so he said something that I'm sure you won't necessarily agree with, but it was just funny the way he put it, which was, he essentially said, and I'm going to use my words, but Christianity is kind of playing Judaism on easy mode, because if you're going to try to get converts, you can't have really high bars to participation at some level. And if you have really high bars of participation and you require someone to fully immerse themselves and to fully assimilate into a culture, and to give up their past really in a much more complete way and move their house and whatever it is, I mean, that's going to be really hard for a lot of people. You're not going to get the converts. And I think, right, so there's this extra thing and we can talk about like there's different versions of Christianity. Some of them are much more demanding than others, and we can have that whole. I get that. But at some level, as long as the symbolic world or the religious world or spiritual world is cut offable, and you can say, well, this is one sphere, this is the other sphere, which essentially everyone does after the medieval period. Then, like, you know, how can that actually be reconciled?
Here's some fighting words, Yosef.
Yeah.
Fighting words. Oh man.
Yeah. Well, when Phlebas
there was
finishes
someone
reading,
there was
when
someone
Phlebas
that was
finishes reading the
catechized by
whole,
the
when he finishes
CRC.
reading the whole Talmud and the Mishnah Torah and stuff, we can talk about it, because, you know, it takes me 7.5 years to read through the whole Talmud. So he can feel free, and that's just the discussions. That's not even the propositional part.
There's some stuff Jesus said that comes to mind with all that, you know, like leave everything, follow me, let the dead bury their own dead, the rich young ruler. Anyhow, Jason, Chezi, Paul, what's up? Something. Hezi, what's up?
Gotta hear from Chezi.
Yeah. I'm here just joining the show.
How's life in Israel right now? I'm sure these things change day to day.
They do change day to day. Again, I'm like a chronic optimist. So like I sent it to Yosef, maybe I sent it to someone else. This article that just this interview that went on with this ultra orthodox representative, and he was saying how since the war he's been getting calls nonstop from the ultra orthodox asking to enlist into the army, and simply the army saying like, that's nice that you want to do it like during wartime right now. We don't have time to, you know, train. And we're, thank God, strong enough where it's not like pick up your pitchfork. But, you know, the idea for me is that unfortunately Israel is thrusted back in its biblical pattern, where we have to be reminded, unfortunately, that you know, we if we're divided inside, that's, you know, that's not where the enemy is. And I think the leadership has failed, but the people of Israel have galvanized and have reached new heights, where I'm proud again to see my people, like everyone from every level of society, really all working overtime, all donating donating blood, just a tremendous amount of charity going around, and it's beautiful. And we need to remind ourselves and look in the mirror and remind ourselves that we as a people know how to act this way collectively. So I remain optimistic.
So we were talking about ritual, law, and we were talking about how I think, you know, what we mean by this word law is different. And Yosef brought off Christine Hayes's book, which I'm definitely going to check out, because, you know, Phlebas sort of comes up with the, you know, what was sort of catechized in the Christian Reformed Church. And, you know, I think part of catechesis is often, especially of children, is a simplification. And then obviously as you grow and you meet and you learn, it's like, it gets complexified. But again, part of what's fascinated me is the attempt in the state of Israel to intersect these various levels of laws, especially because it's and please correct me if I'm wrong, the modern state of Israel seems to be a pluralistic society, which is also a democracy. And so in so many ways, it's got pieces in so many different conflicting layers of our contemporary world in a very concentrated form within a pressure cooker. I mean, and to me, that's so, when I read Paul, let's say, when Paul talks about the role of Israel through history, that seems to be part of the role of Israel through history, through the eyes of Paul, has always been a a microcosm of all of humanity in an intensified form. All of the issues of broader humanity, not all of them in terms of the numerically, but they're sort of concentrated into one story, into one people. And what's amazing about the times today is that's still happening.
So that
all
kind
my
of
folks.
well, what you just said reminded me of Genesis again, because you were saying the whole identity of humanity gets concentrated into the story of Israel, and that's what I brought it up to. I think Yosef and Hezi before, and I'm not sure if they agreed, but I was saying, and I don't know if I was articulating it right either, but I was saying that it seems to me like Israel, the people who worship the God of Israel, are the people who worship the right God, because Israel was given the name to Jacob when he wrestled with God and man together, and it's that tension of wrestling with God and the image of God in man. And I've personally, in my experience, if I push those things to their furthest limits, like even when I was talking to this Muslim group, which the video is not up anymore. Luke, I think, watched it at one point, but I was asking them, like, well, what happens if you want a oneness with God? Like, how do you even resolve this if you actually believe your own scriptures that the image of God is in man? And if you just keep pushing that, and you keep pushing this idea of theosis, you have to result in something like forgiveness. And they said the same thing. There's an idea where they get to the top of the mountain, and there's this one final leap you have to make before you can become one with God, and that's to forgive everybody you've along the way that you've encountered. And so I don't know, and that relating to Genesis too, because the Genesis thing that just happens to that's the story where you take that tree of good and evil, and maybe this is just a different way of me seeing it, but that's just that fruit of playing judge and playing God and saying I know good and evil is just at some point I feel like everybody does that in their life. And there's a way that's referenced, I think, in Isaiah 14 when it's referring to Lucifer, because it's exalting yourself above the heaven, above even the world that God gave you, because he gave you could even look at the heavens as father, the earth as mother, and when you exalt yourself above that and start saying this is damned, because you can look at earth and be like, hey, we should get rid of this or that, and there's almost a way of just like letting things be as God created them and existing with them. And then I don't know, I go back and forth with this though, because there's also a way like where there are, I think it's in Psalms and in Revelation where it says, I saw thrones and they sat on them. And so God wants to make us gods. He wants to make us judges. He wants to make us lawgivers. But the only way to do that is to be sitting on a throne of mercy. And that's the only, and I know that word's not the right word. Sorry, that's the way it's translated in my Bible. I don't know if it's a throne of Hesed. I'm not sure what it is. But that's the only way I know how to deal with law or truth, is to have it. And I think Jordan Peterson says the same thing. It's just, he'll say truth nestled within love. That's the only way I know how to deal with any truth. Any truth is it has to be like on a of love or something like that. Otherwise, it just ends up burning and consuming and devouring, and then you just end up consuming yourself because you can't escape your own truth. That resolves guilt is forgiveness.
Right, Sam? Well, that's something. So Cal, to pitch again the conversation with Cal and Jason and PDK on forgiveness, is Cal has said to me, he's been thinking a lot about judgment recently, and the verse in the New Testament that talks about what's happening. The verse in the New Testament that talks about the unforgivable sin. And I can't remember who it is. There's someone, Cal heard it somewhere in some podcast, but the guy did a riff on the unforgivable sin being unforgiveness.
That's what it is.
That's the one sin that won't allow you to be reconciled with your enemy, with everyone else, is unforgiveness. It traps you in hell. It makes you the opposite of the divine.
Yeah, because there's so many other places in the Gospels where Christ will say this. I mean, he'll say it more specifically. He'll say, if you don't forgive, then your Father won't forgive you. So I don't know why it wouldn't
Straight
be
up.
something else. Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
And even in the Psalms, what does it say? Psalm 18, I think it says, which I don't, God is merciful with those who show mercy or something, or he shows mercy to those who have mercy or something like that. There's this, yeah, and that to me, that's what Paul, like that even Paul is getting at in Romans 11, you know, which that's honestly it's reading the scriptures is what caused me to become more of a universalist. It was Romans 11 along with Ezekiel 16 that just, I can't escape them, and some certain words of Christ, but I mean, like because I just can't really escape the thought now of that God would have mercy on all through the mercy shown us. Because I don't think we can escape our own hypocrisy. And then when you can't do that, you cannot find a place where you would not have mercy on someone else.
Well, except
Ready?
Well,
1,
you
2,
can,
3.
you can.
Universalism.
You can, but I mean, like that's what I mean.
Implicit in that is that there are those who don't show mercy, and therefore mercy is not shown them. I mean, it's right there.
But here's the thing: I don't know that you can do that and be, oh, gosh, I don't know the right. I shouldn't say not Christian, but if you're really taking the words,
because then you're back in the same trap.
Those darn reprobate non-universalists.
The reason I say this is because Christ, the words of Christ were that he did not come to call the righteous but sinners to repentance. And so if you are the chief of all sinners, if you actually view yourself as that.
What if I'm not the chief of all sinners and those others deserve to burn?
Exactly.
Then I still have a hell that I'm inhabiting.
Then put them down there and burn them. Then you got one more stepping stone on your way to heaven. But if you're at the bottom, if you truly are the chief of all sinners, if you are the lowest, then you always find forgiveness for someone. But I think if you don't, I really think that's gonna haunt you, because like whatever one is, he has been named already, and it is known that he is Adam, he is man. So I don't think you can escape this universal history, and I think that's gonna just I don't know how it wouldn't. It would haunt me at least.
I think very much this is where like the Jesus coming for the worst of sinners and St. Paul saying, I wish I were accursed for the sake of my brethren. Like, unless you take that as a hollow platitude, like, did he mean it? I think that's very Christian. That's a very Christian thing. It's a very Jesus-y thing that St. Paul said. He meant it. He said, I will go to hell for my brothers, for the people who don't see this.
There's plenty of people that want to send him there, including someone in our little corner that loves to deride him.
Yeah,
but I've been really moved.
He might be Paul in a past life one time.
I've been really moved going through 10 and 11, especially with all the events going on in Israel right now.
Yeah, that that's a weird synchronicity.
For me, at least.
Yes.
And I did I bring it here? It's just an amazing thing to me. It's a sign Israel remains. I mean, the fact that Israel and the Jews, or whatever nomenclature we wish to use, still in some ways sit in such a central part of human history today. It's just even for an Amil like myself, it's a fascinating thing. And again, I find this story working out in Israel right now. You know, I think Yosef, in terms of what I was thinking of, the fact that the tensions within Israel now between the religiously observant and the secularists are, I mean, that is in some ways where the difference over in my lifetime where things have come. Religion is religion viewed from a secular perspective is once again such a live option. I was watching Molly Worthen's conversation on Seen and Unseen this morning with Justin Brierley. And again, just watching people come to faith that shouldn't come to faith. That she has all the academics, she has all the smart. She was raised in a secular household. Why on earth should she become a Southern Baptist in North Carolina? And you look at even just someone like Jacob and his story, and then to see the modern state of Israel wrestling with these issues today, it just blows me away.
I think that Israel really needs to. I'll go back to that tension you're talking about. I think that tension is really the core of it, and I don't know if the religious are really as religious as they claim they are, and the secular as secular as they claim they are. And I think they're all using we're using the wrong the wrong jargon today. And I think the meaning crisis is an offshoot of that as well, where there's like a requirement to go back and reread and re-examine. And ultimately, John Vervaeke's, his religion that's not a religion, and he's working, that thing out. But I have a religion that's a religion. And again, to me, it's haunting, because I do think when I think of this like maybe I mentioned this in the past when we last spoke about how this Talmud portion that talks about how God comes to Jeroboam and tells him that come with me into the Garden of Eden, and we'll walk together holding hands with the son of David. And this is supposed to be the representatives of both Messiah ben Yosef and Messiah ben David. And he asks who's in front, and he says son of David. So he says, I'm not interested. And I think we're still the secular Israel that Jacob has a very hard time with, Zionism as he calls it. I think that is still Jeroboam holding on, and I think they're scared, like you just said, about this balance of, does religious Israel mean like people are now all keeping the 613, and there's like a high court that's going into people's houses and making sure? I don't envision it that way. I don't think, and I think there's enough sources to also say that that's not what we have envisioned for us. But I think the Israeli people also want it. They want it in a different language. They want to feel that it's not coerced. They want to pick it. They want to choose it. And I think it also requires, and it's painful, it requires also the religious Jews to remove an exoskeleton from them and emerge new. And it's a different version of secularism, and it's a different version of Judaism. And you could say that, these were failed attempts, or they were honest attempts, whether it's reform or conservative, but it wasn't because, the geometry is off. There wasn't enough people. It wasn't in the country. There's many different versions to this. But I think when moments like this happen, again, we have to look inward. So when I look at the response, if the Israeli response was not to crumble from inside, again, I'm putting aside the leadership. If the people all rose up to the plate, that to me that's why the Babylonians are gone and the Greeks are gone and the Romans are gone, because it's everlasting. And we have yet to, while I don't think the light unto the nations is that we, invented like the cherry tomato or the disc on key. That's not great, but that's not our story.
What about falafel?
And falafel.
Who invented falafel, though?
Who invented
falafel? They need some credit for that idea.
It is pretty good and fairly healthy. But yeah, I think all of us, when I talk religious folk, we need to see, we always have to be checking our orientation. And I think what happens in Israel, to me, is a wake-up call again. As individuals and as a nation, we have to orient properly.
And to be fair, like, given how given how the Israeli rabbinate especially has kind of played out in Israel, especially in the past 30, 40 years, but even for the whole time, right, has been whether secular Israelis can really trust it to have Chazi's vision. I wouldn't. I don't think that. I mean, overall, I do not think that's the average kind of understanding and framing that I get from my interactions with the rabbinate, which is much less obviously than someone who lives there. But do we like what? Again, this is part of the whole art thing. When Messiah comes, one of the big parts is that the Sanhedrin gets restored because it has to actually be a body of 70 leaders that people can respect enough and trust enough to kind of work together and have a joint kind of work out a joint religious vision. And the current Israeli rabbinate is not a Sanhedrin. It's not even close to a Sanhedrin. And like people laugh when you talk about like, okay, who would be the 70 guys on this thing? Like, yes, there was an attempt in the early 2000s at creating a Sanhedrin. Napoleon tried to create a Sanhedrin. It's a great weird bit of Jewish history, but like, how would you pick these 70 guys? And are there any that really would have enough consensus? And occasionally there's someone. Maybe you can think of one guy or two guys. I mean, so like that happens. And when they tried to reconstitute it 20 years ago, they tried to come up with a list, and it was. I mean, and even though they found for the most part really good people, like they could not then get people to actually listen and follow them at all. So it didn't even matter, even when they did try to get these types of guys. And there's this weird trade-off there between the types of people that are open and kind and whatever, compassionate, gracious enough, and the type of people who actually like are able to inspire people and hold like power are not necessarily the same traits. And I mean, right? That's complicated. Imagine if you had to find 70 Jesuses, right? 70 people to kind of not fight the Romans and be messiahs, but all work together. I don't know how to give you a better metaphor than kind of listening to your conversations on this before, but that's kind of what we're trying to aim at here.
Yosef, I would say though, and I think maybe this will connect a little more with what Paul was specifically talking about, like on the ground with regards to policy. I forwarded to Yosef this list from the rabbinate with regards to the war that's going on right now. And they had to write out or spell out, basically, as Plebis was saying, they had to spell out that, okay, now that we're in war times, a soldier that is in combat, doesn't have to observe, general terms right now, does not have to observe the Shabbat, and he shouldn't, and like he should be taking his car and driving and using his phone, all to save lives. That's amazing. Now there are people, there's military support, that's not on the ground fighting right now. They should try to observe the Shabbat, but if for some reason something comes up, they should immediately drop that and they don't have to observe the Shabbat anymore. And there's a whole list of things showing how like anyone that is religious now needs to tweak his life. However, seemingly they were using in some cases the more, let's say, lenient interpretation, so that the soldiers should have the most amount of flexibility. This to me, I hear an echo, but why is it my echo? Is it gone? Yeah. This to me is the rabbinate. If you're looking from a micro perspective, it's a fail. If you're looking from a macro perspective, obviously it's miraculous, because we never, like, who thought we would have something like that again? When I'm looking from the macro perspective and I'm looking at these things like this happening, like this war, this is again an opportunity for the man and the hour to meet. And I think that's the kind of leadership that ultimately comes. Like when we have this great sage, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, when the temple is getting destroyed, he's not making a quorum together. He decides, he goes to the Romans and tells me, I want the wisest of men, and I want to move the whole center of Jewish thought into this other town called Yavne. And that changes Judaism forever. But that's a move he decides. No one voted on that. And I think that seeing them send out this list to me was, and Yosef said, like, it's sort of like, I'm happy they're sending it out, but it should be sort of like obvious that, like, this is what they should be doing. And these are global wake-up calls, whether it's COVID, whether it's a meaning crisis, whether it's something like this that has to happen, and let the leadership know you are not connecting to the people. And you could see that on the ground level, all these soldiers, and this is interesting because there is a general, a very highly decorated general that has basically been completely sidelined because he mentioned Hero Israel. He said the Shema basically in a preparation for a battle. If you look at the Israeli soldiers now in every video, they're all singing and dancing, using biblical terms, singing, praising God. We're going in. There's news anchors saying that God's armies are coming. This is a secular country, and they're all using very, very biblical and religious terms. So I don't know. It's moments like this that really, I think, shape certain people. The 6-Day War made my grandfather decide tell his congregation, like, can't you hear Mother Rachel calling? And like, I'm leaving, and my family's moving, and that's happening. So I think, I don't know, this might even be more influential than like the 6-Day War, or like, it's so shocking to the core where again, like it's in biblical scale. So I think here you could even see a response from the rabbinate, which is trying to in real time bring in how the Torah would deal with this war. And that's really built into the system.
Maybe.
What should Israel do?
Like with the war?
Yeah. I guess
what they have done. They've been pushing off this deadline of when they're going to attack, giving more and more time for the refugees to move. They've been still sending letters saying, move, leave, go.
I presume that the leaders of Hamas have also gotten these letters and might have acted accordingly.
Yeah, leaders of Hamas today have told them to ignore the letters, go back to your homes. This way it will be harder for the army to find us. So, it's obviously, it's nuts. What do I think we do? We need to go in there and we need to obviously completely eliminate the threat. That's what the country needs to do. Otherwise, it won't survive. Both because those people will still come back, and second of all, because we live in the Middle East, and if you smell weakness, then our enemies will attack. And peace deals are that could change like this. On the other side, though, and unfortunately, I understand the sentiment in Israel that we're sort of not interested and no one wants to talk about this, and everyone's like thirsty for like some sort of retribution. There's no conversation. Like, it's sad because I know it's too much to ask from them right now, but like, they are our cousins, and they're not going anywhere. So there has to be some sort of conversation how this looks after. And
you can never completely eliminate a threat. I feel like that was one of America's mistakes too. Like Peugeot will talk about, you can never completely get rid of the fringe. It gets exponentially harder the closer you get to getting completely rid of something, to get rid of the last little bit. And I worry that Israel's going to get in a situation where it has no clear, termination condition on its objective. And okay, we want retribution. How much counts as satisfactory retribution? Okay, how much of a diminishment of Hamas counts as the elimination of the threat? Okay, how much violence would that take? And then how much hatred does that engender in the next generation of Palestinians? And in which case, how much threat have you even really reduced? And I mean, I'm not saying Israel shouldn't do anything. I think there's a clear consensus of unity, and we need to do something in Israel than there's been in a long time. But that can also be very dangerous.
Absolutely. It's definitely been one of the harder parts here. I mean, Israel, obviously, it's much, the level of kind of trauma and pain that Israel is going through right now is we have a shadow of that here. But it's it's hard because like things like retribution or vengeance is like and they're using very biblical language, given that, you know, they definitely are, but sometimes it's going into territory where like I'm very uncomfortable. And like where's, you know, some of the calls from religious leaders too, not to, I mean, but also from secular leaders using sometimes religious language, or just secular leaders using the secular language, has been, and look, it's really hard. Like, how do you talk to people? I mean, right? You're in the middle of a war, in the middle of this isn't right. So multiple people pointing out this is not PTSD. These are people currently undergoing the trauma, and trauma does a lot of things. I mean, right? The way it narrows your perspective and like, you know, you become very focused. In some ways, it's good, but it also makes you blind to certain things. And regulating emotions kind of goes out the window. And like, how do you can't have a rational conversation about like what are those limits that Sam's bringing up so easily, especially kind of at a scale like where there's mass formation and like all this type of, you know, thinking going on at this level. And like, how do you have, you know, I mean, and in part, this is in theory why doing religion day in and day out as a habit and training your mind and training your whatever, the way you think, the way you feel, helps when you encounter these situations. For me, like this is where all that kind of, you know, when the rubber hits the road, this is where you want to have all those skills trained in, just like you're a fighter pilot, just like you're any of the soldiers, right? Like you want to have the skills in you, so as soon as you're like really in trouble, that's how you react to things. But sometimes one, that gets overridden to some degree or another, and two, like I don't know if Hezi, are people, you just said like you're not really seeing so much of this conversation, like where are it's great they're united, but like if everyone's united in like some sort of mob rage, you know, that's not good. And like
you can always just turn off the water tap, wait a week or two, and just roll the tanks to the Mediterranean Sea.
In theory, well, that's. I mean,
no one's calling for that. So then, what is it short of that is?
No, you have a lot of Israelis calling for like. No, I would say that no one in Israel wants the death of innocent Palestinians. Having said that, they're all like, listen, at this point, you know, like England had Dresden, people had Hiroshima, like no one wants that. This is called war. And like, it's also happening at the backdrop of, like we said, never again. What if Israel had its army during the Holocaust? Would people be like, no, like this is, you know, Nazi acts, what they did. It really is horrifying what they did. Now they're saying like, obviously we can't be proportionate, right? Like no one's saying they want us to go find babies, slit their heads, kill, like burn house. No one wants us to do that, but that would be proportionate. So I'm asking also Yosef, like as a religious person, right? Using your religious lens, what do you think God is expecting from you or from us in response to this? And the question is, at some point you have to realize like there is a conversation we're supposed to be having. We're supposed to be wrestling. Abraham is wrestling, right? And Abraham is privy to the conversation that God is having with the three angels, right? Abraham is still there, and he happens to be seeing this conversation or hearing this conversation God is having with the angels. He wasn't even invited. It was just like,
that's the Trinity. It's not three angels, but anyway.
Right. I'm so sorry. I always get confused. Those Jews. I don't know if it's like, are we supposed to raise, like, you know, is it turning the other cheek? Is that the response right over here? Is there some sort of mass turning the other cheek that needs to be happening over here? Or is there a recognition that we are living in a certain world, and this certain world has rules, and there's combatants, and there's people around, and people do die, and it's hard for us to justify an act like that, obviously. But there can't. I'm thinking about Amalek, and again, has nothing to do with the Palestinian peoples. Okay, 30 to 60% of them are from Jewish descent, and they're my cousins, and I hope to be standing with them at the temple. Having said that, Amalek forever. We think like, you know, this is just an idea. It's just in our hearts. You know, since the Nazis, it's hard for us. No, it pops its head up again. That kind of evil exists where they'll just murder and kill everything. And the world needs to have a response to that. And I think as Jewish people with this at our doorstep, we specifically need to have a response to that. And now more than ever, when I pray for one of the prayers are to give that God grants us wisdom. So granting wisdom to all the leadership. So I can't.
Look,
I don't know what
we're not a pacifistic religion the way that, let's say, parts of Anabaptist Christianity are, or even, let's say, early Christianity is, like Sam's been discussing a little bit in the server lately. And one, I mean, but I want to, so we have the death penalty in Jewish law, right? I mean, let's go back to, for you'll surely die, but maybe not the garden. Let's pick any of the other capital case punishment, right? Where we have extremely high standards for that to happen, to the point where, you know, you say it happened every 7 years or 70 years, but capital cases were rarely ruled guilty and worthy of capital punishment, right? And what happens when a capital punishment has to happen? The Sanhedrin has to fast, and they have to spend the day in prayer during that day, because it's a very serious thing to take a life. And I'm not saying, I'm not seeing a cheapening of life on the Israeli side for the most part. I mean, I don't think that's where they're going. And I know for all of the things that have happened, the IDF's ethical code for its soldiers is unbelievably rigorous compared to other militaries. And I do have some faith in that, though I don't think everyone's going to perfectly abide by it, like, because humans are humans. But and like, I think, and it's great. You know, a lot of these, like, we have rules of war. We have Jewish rules of war. We have like not just secular Israeli rules of war, but Jewish rules of war. And I think, right, there's a certain, I'm not saying, you know, you don't fight and you defend. So we have self-defense. We have all these principles. We've been thinking and working through these principles for a long time. It's true, we haven't wrestled with them in the real world as much as some other civilizations, because lots of rules against us fighting for various reasons. But that's, sometimes we ignore that we actually do have quite a bit on this stuff in real world applications. I mean, medieval Spanish Jews had weapons. Then there's rules about them. There's rules about sieges. Maimonides has an entire chapter about the siege warfare, right? And it's not just rules, because here's where, right? This is where, why I said it was obvious and why I was like kind of disappointed by the thing about like the Sabbath thing, is this gets to the beginning of my conversation with Luke and Paul, and the kind of the letter and the spirit of the law are always for us need to be fully combined. And if you have religious people who don't know that it's obvious, that the rabbinut has to tell them that these are the rules, then to me that's highlighting the disconnect between the worlds, and not like, oh, it's amazing that, you know, all these things are happening and they can do this in, you know, in the past, right? And that there's been a failure. And yes, I mean, absolutely, like a huge failure in Jewish education, in religious circles and in non-religious circles, right? And yeah, I mean, I described it the other day, is that my primary feeling this week has not been disappointment or anger with God. I'm much more disappointed with humans, and especially with us. I mean, us. So I'm using us here as not necessarily, I mean, like Hamas I expected from. I get it. But like these types of things highlight how I failed, my community's failed, how religious Jews have failed, how Judaism has failed, but also, yeah, how the Western world has failed, liberalism has failed. To some extent, humanity as a whole has failed. Right? It's all these concentric circles. And then there's and we can point and say, but this isn't about passing blame, because as I said, I started it. There's something, so in Chezi, when you ask, you know, what should I be doing in this moment? That is the question of the hour. Because That is exactly, and part of that is because I'm here and I'm not there. If I was there, I'd probably be fighting or whatever it is.
But,
I mean,
yeah, even soldiers are fighting. This is the command they were given, and I take no offense from Anselman over here in the comments. It's all good. But I asked someone like him, right? Like I'm Jordan Peterson's concentration camp guard. Okay, at least we're both wearing suits. We're very stylish. I ask someone like that, right? And I'm also asking you, like, yeah, they're innocent. We shouldn't kill them. But there's a missile coming out of the kitchen. So what am I doing about that kitchen, though? What am I doing about that kitchen? And if I give you a general number of, you're right, Israel, after 5,000 deaths, they should stop. So wait, so baby number 4,889, it's okay to kill him, but baby, like, and it's coming to my house. The missile's coming to, I have to stop it. And I'll go even more extreme. You know what? We're not going to go into Gaza. Okay. And this also goes to you, Sam. I'm not going to go into Gaza. Instead, I'm going to give you the Temple Mount. It's yours. Okay. I'm removing my army back. It's one state. I'm getting rid of all the laws that you don't like. You know what? Hallelujah. The day is over here. Okay. At what point are you, like, now that happens and we see there isn't peace and they try to now there's more intense pogroms. At what point can I shoot back? And then, like, is it in my house? And if I shoot him, but your bullet, when he killed the murderer, it also killed this kid. Like, at what point am I allowed to be like, stop, right? No one wanted us. They try to get rid of us. Here's your land. Take your land. We said, here's a deal. They said no. Here's a deal. They said no. And again, it's sad that you need to preface this because, like, but apparently, and I'm not blaming Ansel, man, like, yet I still sound to him like the bad man. And I want peace. Have a Palestinian prime minister. It's all good. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. It sounds like a trope, but like if we laid down our guns, we would be dead. And if they laid down their guns, there would be peace. Those just are the facts. And if that's the case, Yosef, then like, and what do you want to do? If you said like, if I was Israel, then I would be fighting. Then like, okay, so that's what you want to do. And you want to be fighting because you're like, I'm defending myself. No one wants death, and you hear like reporters talking about it, like, is it proportionate, not proportionate? It's been taking too long. You turned off the water. What do these things even mean? We're still killing people, right? There's murders going on, but that's only because think of where we could all be if we're spending the time instead of making what we just did right now. We just showed the world our new lasers that cost nothing for us to use to shoot the rockets out of the sky. It's literally science fiction. No more Iron Dome. We're using these lasers. Or like, why? But I want to cure cancer. I don't want to shoot transformer lasers into the sky. But the opportunity is not being given to us. And I think, I don't know, to me, the fact that Biden is doing this, you could say it's election and things like that. I believe this is.
What's this that Biden's doing?
This intense support. I believe this is the Christian Joe Biden coming forward. I think like there is a stance over here of like, you know, he's used this many times how at 14 he takes every one of his children to Dachau in Germany to see about the Holocaust. And his father told him that like if he ever sees evil, so this is your moment, Joe. It's in front of you right now. We all say never again. It's nice for us to read this, like, you know, on the little black thing once a year, the Holocaust Museum. Here are the pictures. You see it happening. Like, and from the interviews I've seen him, he wasn't babbling. I saw someone being like, I have to stop this. I don't know what. So Yosef, given that, I know that was emotional, but like, what? So what should we do, Yosef? You have the power. Sam, you have the power. What do we do?
I think it's easy to say from America, and I bet that you're right. If I were an Israeli Jew living in Israel and I saw videos of babies being beheaded, and maybe I even knew or had first or second degree connections to people, I'd be like, it's time to fight. And I think almost any human has that instinct within them, and for good and understandable reasons. I think a lot of what we're talking about is there is this weird mixture of religion and secularity in Israel, and that is coming into question about how to deal with violence. And I think all humans also understand, like, it's weird to say this, Anselman, don't misinterpret me, not that that stopped you in the past, but there's something sacred about war and violence in a dark way. But I think we all understand, like, you know, like the Sanhedrin fasting before they have to execute someone. And, you know, the way that we give like some super honor and veneration to veterans, and the sort of, I don't know, that there, we understand that there needs to be something religious about war in order for it to not just be entirely evil and awful. And it seems to me like Israel is searching for a way to try and understand that amongst itself now. Like, on a purely strategic level, I'd say don't go into Gaza. Do the drones, assassinations, spies, sniper, rocket stuff, but don't send in troops. It's a bait. It's a trap. Iran wants you to do it. And this isn't the last trick Iran has up its sleeves. If you get bogged down in Gaza, then Hezbollah is next. Stuff from Syria is next. And this is round one. Be careful how you respond.
I'm going to sound like a war hawk, but like at some point, I need to meet Iran. And at some point, I need to meet, like, these are the bad actors. You know, we're looking at the map change again. And whether it's going to be like, we talk about it in the news, like, you know, China's a problem and China's a problem. But, like, you know, there are world powers and the game is afoot. So, like, you know, the destroyers are there. This might sound controversial. I don't think at least not the first destroyer, it's not there because of what just happened. It's there because there's other political interests already in play. There's the Saudi deal going on. These things are, and I don't want to say that America is necessarily looking for a war, but like it's very difficult to see like how they're going to necessarily keep themselves out of this one if this goes down.
We sent 2 aircraft carriers to the Eastern Mediterranean. I don't think we even did that. Like, I think there was multiple times during the Iraq War where we had 1 aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf or something. One aircraft carrier is a resounding support of a resounding gesture of support. 2 aircraft carriers we're ready. And
what are we ready for though? And I'll leave in a minute to do this class. Like, the world just got to witness that if certain groups get their opportunity, they will try to completely massacre us. That, like, it wasn't like what. So, you know, it's time to put your money where your mouth is, right? And this is what it looks like. And he says, don't. And it's very clear. Iran and Hamas, they could all decide tomorrow, right? Like, because they're chanting in Gaza also, death to America. This is like a war that goes back a long time. And this is, it says God tested Abraham. And we ask, why wasn't Isaac being tested? Because he's the one going up, right? There's different versions about this, his age. Maimonides says ultimately, though, like, you know, forget Maimonides. There's interpretations that come and say that he wasn't being tested because the way he viewed life, right? Ultimately, I'm going to mention this in the Pirkei Avot class, everything is God. So the best thing I could give back to, you know, the sacrifice is a substitute. Really, you could just have me back, right? So he's looking at it as sort of in this logical way. And the test is for Abraham ultimately to hear God's voice and say, I'm not interested in this. If you are dealing with people that, if their view of life and their view of religion, or at least their interpretation of this religion, okay, manifests itself this way, and I always use this example. If the reaction is going to be, if I draw your prophet, you're going to kill people, like that, I can't play. You can't play with the other kids. And again, the invitation is not only should you play in my sandbox, you are the son of Abraham. Okay, just you have to at some point drop your sword. And if that is still the action at some point, and like you were saying, Paul, like it all, you know, in a certain way, Israel's living it, then this is that fight again, us against this evil. And it represents itself in Hezbollah, and it represents itself in Iran and in North Korea. So like there's a lot of big talk about we're going to hit back and we're going to slam back. And we don't want to do an Iraq war. And like Sam is saying, we want to attach it to something holy. But on that note, gentlemen, please do this. Sherry?
Well, I was going to, you got to head out.
I got to head out. But
You got to go.
It's fine.
Bye,
At the
Kezi.
top of the hour too, so but thank you, Kezi. Thanks for keeping the stream going, Sherry.
Yeah, no worries. I'm running around doing stuff, but I'm listening at the same time.
Okay.
Bring in some feminine energy here.
Well, it's you know, part of what's going on now is I also watch. It's been fascinating watching the participation, even Anselman, because you know we've all watched Anselman for the last 4 or 5 years. You sort of get a picture of him. He's never come on to a live stream, never seen him in person, but we have a map of him based on, when I say something, I kind of know where Anselman's going to be because we've done enough things. And then when this breaks out, very very sympathetic towards Palestine, and so then it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. That kind of
Anselman often is surprising. He is often surprising. He has his own genuine self-made morality that is hard to predict.
But the way we participate in these things now, obviously for Chezi, I mean, when it's your zip code in America, when it's the town that you're living in, when it's your house, when it's your kids, that's very direct. But watching people who aren't, like these university demonstrations in the United States, watching people, it's like, so what's your dog in this fight? And then other people noting that, sort of the Progressive Sexuality Coalition is aligned up with fundamentalist Islam. Oh, well, that's fascinating. It's a fascinating alliance.
My mom and dad and sister were in Istanbul a couple days ago, and there was a giant protest or demonstration or rally, I'm not quite sure which of those is the right word, in support of Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And not Palestine, Hamas. And that my parents and my sister had to stay inside in their hotel the whole day because they didn't want to risk anything. And I don't know how much that was about.
Upcycle's correcting your language. Again, it's the fascinating things we have going on in our corner.
And I don't know how much that was to do with sort of internal Turkish politics versus geopolitics and stuff, but I don't know. It's a strange. It's not just a couple million people in a strip of land the size of like a U.S. county. This is way bigger and more complicated than that, and there are way more people than I would expect that are willing to look the other way or halfway defend or full-throatedly defend what was happening.
And it also fascinates me because I grew up in northern New Jersey, significant Jewish population. I grew up mostly in an African-American community, but I, never really bumped into hardly any anti-Semitism. And then just watching, the rise, the resurrection of anti-Semitism in today's world. And to me, anti-Semitism was always just sort of a
disembodied boogeyman.
Yeah, I had just amazing. All of the Jews that I knew in northern New Jersey, they were model citizens. They were the best people around. They really were, and the the Jewish religious centers were doing wonderful things in the community. And it's like, these are the hated people. Now, if you talk to Jacob and he goes off on you, you might get a sense of, yeah, you know, if you're that low in agreeableness, you're going to make some enemies. But that wasn't, you know, and I remember there was a guy named Leon Chase he was an old Jewish carpenter who would come into the lumber yard where I work, and everybody knew that he still had the somebody's got something going on. Everybody knew that he still had his tattoo from the German. You know, I was then a young college student and talking to Leon about, you know, hiding in the sawdust in the concentration camp, and then now to see this energy come out, and I would imagine, I mean, Christians, if we had that much hatred part of us, we just begin to ask the question, like, well, what did we do to make people hate us so much? And I'm sure folks are wrestling with that, and I look at the situation and it's like, a good option? I don't see any good options. You know, you have to, what do you do? I have no idea. It
never really went away. I mean, it's obviously different, but when you're identifiably an Orthodox Jew in the West, I mean, whether here, London, France, I mean, I've encountered, and I've only encountered mostly speech, like hate speech, personally. But I've had friends who've had more. I mean, physical altercation, like much more serious stuff. And I mean, we had someone who came to speak at one of our synagogues. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, who grew up in Egypt, and the bestseller in Egypt, even today, but certainly the past 20, 25 years, has been Mein Kampf, the best-selling book in Egypt. And like, so in some ways, the energy doesn't really go away. I mean, it kind of, in some ways, I think Christians are, obviously, you don't have to directly confront it as much, and it's not me as in your face, and it's not whatever. And even me, like, I, generally move through mostly bubbles of things. So the little times I've had to encounter directly have been fairly mild. But yeah, I mean, I don't, and it really depends. It depends on what part, we lived in London for a year, and there, my wife was doing a master's, and there was like active recruitment to Muslim terrorist organizations on her campus that the campus kept trying to stop. And like, she's somewhat I mean, she's not quite as identifiably Orthodox as me because she covers her hair, but she doesn't have a kippah or tzitzit. And like in East London, lots of people cover their hair, but it is a different style of covering. But like, she didn't really encounter issues, but there are definitely neighborhoods I wouldn't go into. And like, it was always kind of there. And I think they're right. There's just certain, I don't know, I mean, it's a loaded word, but privilege in order that we to ignore this type of stuff. And it just really does build and kind of fester in some corners. I mean, if you've never seen the Gazan version of Sesame Street, it is extremely disturbing stuff, where like AK-47s make often appearances.
The Gazan version of Sesame Street?
Yeah.
Can I find that on YouTube? Or do I have to go to Rumble?
These days, you used to be able to find it on YouTube. I don't know if you still can.
I think there's a new PBK series coming on.
You could see these like crazy like demonstrations of 7-year-olds like dressed as mujahideen in like full gear with like fake weapons and like there's just like, and like what do you and this gets to Fezzi's point. Fezzi asked me hard questions. I don't have any. But what do you do? How do you respond? Like, what do you do with those kids? I mean, like, well, how do you heal like that type of? And part of it's from real place. Like, it's not just like brainwashing, indoctrination, right? Part of it is Gaza is an awful place to live. It has been for a long time, especially since Israel pulled out and Hamas took over, where a lot of the internal infrastructure has basically been neglected. There's a lot of huge issues, both how Israel kind of ran around like this Gaza from the outside, but also how Hamas ran it from the inside. And like, there's a massive amount of trauma and pain and awfulness that these kids have been through. And like, yeah, I mean, part of it, and not just those kids, but their parents and young parents. I mean, Gaza is mostly people under 25, right? I mean, it's a huge, I mean, the demographic numbers there are like some of the most skewed in the world, but there's a lot of, and a lot of orphans and a lot of people who are at least lost one parent or sibling or whatever. I mean, to either to Israeli violence or to Palestinian violence. And like, it's how this is part, I mean, and in some ways, I mean, it's a weird parallel. Maybe Anselm will like that. I can't actually see his comments right now, but like
I
there
think
is
he stormed off in protest. Maybe
okay. There is this weird parallel where like it's kind of the question of how do you deal with like people who've been through this much trauma and like heal this. Similar to what we were asking at the end of the Holocaust, like how do you deal with all this trauma? And it's, I mean, whether it comes from a place where like, yeah, because if I don't do this, then they're going to kill me. I mean, that doesn't necessarily, in some level justifies it, another level really doesn't. And like what, and you know, that's why, because these questions were so, right, they're hard to answer because, yeah, at what point does this become just kind of pragmatic strategy, as Sam was pointing out, of like self-defense and like protecting your family, or even protecting other people. I mean, how many of the people who are, I mean, now a lot of these stories are coming out of the Israelis who are killed, or not just Israelis, Jews and Arabs who went into the border communities that were being attacked to actually try to help and got killed.
Yeah. I think I'm going to, this is my last comment that I'm leaving. So anybody who's watching on my channel and wants to continue to watch, you can go to Grail Country. It's being streamed. They've got the thing. You know, I think instructive is also what happens at the end of the Second World War with the Japanese population, because they were subject to intense propaganda by their regime to hate Americans. And then we nuked them. I mean, the United States nuked Japan. That's important to remember. And then after the war,
no, I was saying twice.
Now, of course, Japan surrendered, which, because you don't really have a nation state that you're dealing with, you can't sort of, I mean, you could attack Iran and bring Iran to surrender and have regime change. You can't really do that, and that's the problem, the asymmetry. But
in Japan, you could have the emperor, who is the embodiment of some sort of god, declare, and all the people are in submission. Although I think I even heard that some of the generals tried to stop him from doing that. But
well, and then part of the big, I mean, right in 1941, FDR says, you know, we're going to demand nothing less than unconditional surrender, and that became a big problem towards the end of the war, because the question was, will we allow Japan to keep the imperial family? And in the end, they decided, yes, they would. And then that became a piece of sort of turning the Japanese population around. But then again, the kind of enmity between the United States and Japan has a very different history than what you're dealing with here. So my prayers are with you. My prayers are certainly with the Palestinian people. And we want, you know, we definitely want peace in that land, and hopefully there can be a way to get there. So thank you all. Love chatting. Great to see all of you. And I've got things to do. So take care.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in here really quick, guys. So I have a little perspective to bring, not from military or international conflict or anything as significant by any means as what's going on, but just in terms of the messiness of it, and the necessity for the perspectives both of those who are there and also those of us who are like kind of like sitting back and, as myself, in peaceful upstate New York, where the worst thing I have to deal with is like a big gust of wind cutting my power for a little bit. I was a correction officer at a juvenile detention facility for a little while. Before I did that, I had one perspective on people who would get locked up in a juvenile detention facility. I had a perspective of what it would be like to be a CO and so on. And so I begin working there. I have to go through all this different training on how to respond to crises, how to deal with if you have to restrain somebody, if there's a riot going on, all this type of stuff. If someone is suicidal, what do you do? So you go through this whole long training process. It's weeks and weeks long. Then you get on the floor, and of course, the first coworker you run into tells you, "Hey, you remember that stuff you learned in training? You can forget about all of it because it doesn't apply. It doesn't work." And so you're like, all right. If you're someone like me who is when I'm taught something, I kind of just take it as okay, yeah, this is a new environment to me. These are the rules. This must be the way I have to operate. And then I try and just go from that. And you learn very quickly working at a juvenile detention facility that in one sense, the coworker is correct in saying the rule, forget about your training because this isn't what it was like when you were in training. So one kid jumps on your back, another kid's trying to punch you in the face, another kid's spitting at you, another kid's telling you to suck their such and such, and all this stuff is going on, and your emotions start rising up, and you just want to react badly. And so, but what you find is that those people who say to throw out the rules, right, turns out they kind of actually use the training in those moments, right? So it's not like it's a crystal clear representation of what was learned in training when someone's responding to a crisis where one kid's trying to stab another kid and you're trying to keep them from killing each other. It's not like the restraint that you do on them is perfect, but you are following the basic guidelines of don't exert more force than is necessary to resolve the situation, right? So there's this kind of tension between the ideal of how a situation should be responded to based off of an assumed status quo of the environment, right? And then there's the reality of what the environment's really like and the reality of what the participants are really like within that environment, right? So the agents and the arena, I guess, right? So there's an idea of what the arena is supposed to be. There's an idea of how the agents are supposed to interact. And then neither of those fit the ideal at all, right? And the overwhelming consensus among, let's say, soldiers, COs on the floor in a facility like that is very anti-training, anti the outsider, right? So it's okay, if you're not on the working with me on the floor, you have no right telling me how I should do my job. And so analogous to this situation here, they would look at something like us talking, but not being on the ground in Israel or in Palestine or wherever, right, in Gaza, and say, that's kind of nice what you guys are saying, in either direction, but what does it matter, right? But I think there's a utility in us who are in more privileged arenas, right? While stuff like this is happening, it brings to our hearts and minds the ideals, right? Of there's got to be these ideals of there's got to be a right way to approach the situation. And so conversations like this between us, but even between people who are perhaps have more agency with regard to impacting the arena. There's people who need to be in these situations who can talk, and there's people in these situations who are going to land on one end of the spectrum and land on the other end of the spectrum, and they're going to be opposing each other, right? So I'm completely pacifist, and I'm going to be like, oh, no, we need to just it's sad that there's going to be casualties, but we just need to just eliminate, we just need to do, a Hiroshima level just response, and there, now the situation's over. We don't even have to worry about it anymore. It's done, right? But I just wanted to say all that just to bring in a perspective that there's utility in speaking about and defining and reacquainting oneself with the ideals. And that process, however, right, can't that process crosses its jurisdiction, like goes beyond its purpose when it stalls on the floor, right? So, for instance, if I'm in the middle of restraining some kid because he's about to stab another kid, and I'm about to do it, and I'm doing it wrong, right? I'm going to cause perhaps harm to this other kid. I'm not meaning to cause harm, but I'm grabbing him, I'm taking him down however I can so he doesn't kill this other kid, right? Or hurt this other kid, whatever. And all of a sudden the trainer pops in, stands in between me. He's like, whoa, you're about to do that wrong. And now the other kid gets stabbed to death, right? And it's like, that's not just some contrived example, right? Like that kind of stuff could, and in other ways has actually happened, right? So I've known a female CO who got assaulted and raped because other staff saw that she was doing things wrong. So they brought her aside to mentor her and train her in the moment. But they get attacked because now it's distracted other workers. And it was a whole big mess, giant mess. People got injured. So I know I'm not necessarily addressing anybody in particular in this group, just anybody who's watching who is kind of like a keyboard warrior in either sense, right? Of like, oh, these people need to stop talking about their ideals, and oh, these people need to stop like overreacting in the moment. Like there is utility and necessity for both perspectives. And I just wanted to throw that out because this whole thing has just been like triggering me in some of my memories of far less traumatic things than what people are going through in the Middle East right now.
That's great. Thank you.
I probably gotta head out in a minute. There was something I was gonna say, but I don't know how relevant it is, and it's probably relevant, but